Pipeline Studio is about understanding your workflow and knowing when it's running smoothly. Constraint is usually framed as a limitation, something imposed, something in the way. But most broken pipelines aren't constrained by force. They're constrained by inheritance, rules you didn't choose, defaults you never questioned, structures that once protected the work, now quietly shaping it. Constraint isn't always visible. In fact, the most dangerous constraints rarely announce themselves. They feel like how things are done. Early in a process, constraint is helpful. It reduces noise. It narrows attention. It keeps momentum from leaking in every direction. But constraint has a shelf life. What begins as guidance slowly hardens into boundary. What once created focus begins to dictate behavior. And eventually the system stops responding to reality. It responds to itself. This is where flow starts to thin. Not because effort disappeared, not because skill declined, but because the pipeline no longer allows certain movements. Certain ideas don't fit anymore. Certain questions feel inconvenient. Certain signals are filtered out before they're even noticed. At that point, the system is still running. Outputs are still being produced. And stability feels safe until it isn't. Constraint becomes dangerous when it is no longer conscious, when it can't be named, when it's defended emotionally instead of examined structurally. You hear it in phrases like, "That's not how we do things," or "We tried that before," or "This works well enough." Those aren't conclusions, they're constraint speaking. Healthy pipelines periodically surface their limits. They ask which rules still serve the work and which only serve the system. Unhealthy ones optimize around the constraint instead. They route around discomfort by adding layers, tools, and process. And slowly, without any single failure, movement becomes expensive. Constraint doesn't break flow all at once. It narrows it, channels it, until there's only one safe path left. And when reality demands deviation, the system can't bend. It doesn't snap. It stalls. That's the moment where friction begins to appear, not as resistance, but as information. And what you do with that friction determines whether the pipeline adapts or begins to drift. What makes constraint difficult to see is that it often arrives as success. A workflow stabilizes. A method proves reliable. A system delivers predictable outcomes. And predictability is comforting. So the constraint is reinforced, codified, protected. Over time, the system begins to reward compliance more than insight. You learn which actions are safe, which ideas move smoothly through the pipeline, which ones slow everything down. Those slower ideas don't disappear because they're bad. They disappear because they don't fit. And fitting becomes the goal. This is how constraint reshapes behavior without ever issuing a command. No one says don't explore. No one says don't question. The system simply makes those actions expensive, more time, more justification, more friction. Eventually, the pipeline trains its operators. It teaches them where not to push, where curiosity costs too much, where deviation feels irresponsible. At that point, the system isn't broken, it's efficient, but efficiency without renewal is brittle. Constraint, left unexamined, turns learning into repetition, innovation into variation, movement into circulation. The pipeline keeps moving, but it's no longer discovering. And this is why constraint must be surfaced deliberately. Not removed, not vilified, named. Because once a constraint is visible, it becomes adjustable. Once it's conscious, it can be negotiated with reality. But until then, it governs quietly, deciding what can happen long before any decision is made. This concludes this session. Let what you've heard settle before continuing.